The morning of March 16, 1978, is cold and grey over Rome. The scent of damp earth and exhaust fumes hangs in the air. Via Caetani, a quiet residential street, is waking up. The only sound is the methodical click-clack of a shoemaker's hammer from a nearby shop. A three-car convoy glides through the intersection. A blue Fiat 130, a white Alfa Romeo, and a second Fiat. Inside the Alfa, a man in his early 60s, with thoughtful eyes behind thick glasses, reviews a speech. He is Aldo Moro, former Prime Minister of Italy, the architect of a historic political compromise. He is on his way to Parliament. His bodyguards, 5 of them, are alert but not alarmed. It is a Tuesday like any other. At 9:02 a.m., time fractures. A white Fiat 128 swerves to block the lead car. A yellow Renault stops abruptly behind the Alfa Romeo. The convoy is trapped. Doors fly open. Not policemen. Young men and women in airline uniforms, their movements terrifyingly synchronized. They carry submachine guns. The silence is obliterated by the deafening, metallic roar of automatic fire. The pop-pop-pop is short, controlled, surgical. Glass explodes. Metal screams. The shoemaker's hammer stops. The bodyguards, caught in a lethal crossfire, have no chance. One is hit as he draws his pistol. Another slumps over the steering wheel. The smell of cordite and blood floods the street. The attackers move with a chilling, rehearsed efficiency. They pull the dazed Moro from the Alfa Romeo. He is shoved into the back of the Renault. One of the young women calmly picks up his briefcase, scattering papers across the asphalt. 55 seconds. That is all it takes. The cars screech away, leaving behind a scene of carnage, 5 bodies, and a country's shattered innocence. The roar of the engines fades, replaced by the first stunned cries of witnesses. A single leather shoe lies in the middle of the road. This was not a chaotic ambush. It was a military operation. And it was only the beginning. Aldo Moro, the most powerful politician in Italy, has just vanished. The kidnappers leave no doubt about their identity. They are the Brigate Ross, the Red Brigades, a far-left terrorist group born from the political turmoil of the 1970s. But this is different. They have never attempted anything of this scale, this audacity. This is a direct declaration of war on the Italian state. To understand the earthquake of that moment, you must understand the man in the back of that Renault. Aldo Moro was not just a politician, he was a pillar. A devout Catholic, a professor of law, a leading figure in the Christian democracy, the party that had ruled Italy since World War II. Italy in the 1970s was a seething cauldron. The years of lead. Political violence was a daily reality. Fascist bombs, left-wing guerrillas, street clashes. The country felt perpetually on the brink. And Moro, the ultimate mediator, had engineered a daring, controversial solution, the historic compromise. A plan to bring the Italian Communist Party, the largest in Western Europe, into the government. To many, it was a masterstroke to stabilize a fracturing democracy. To others on the extremes, it was a betrayal, a monstrous alliance that would destroy Italy. To the Red Brigades, it was the final proof that the state was a corrupt prison to be smashed. For the Italian people, the days after the kidnapping are a collective nightmare. Police and carabinieri set up roadblocks across the country. Every van, every basement is suspect. The news cycles are frantic, breathless. The nation holds its breath, clinging to a fragile hope. Maybe it's a political stunt. Maybe he'll be released. Then, 9 days later, hope curdles into dread. The first communique arrives. Not a ransom note. A political manifesto. A photograph is released. Moro sits against a blank wall, under the banner of the Red Brigades, a 5-point star inside a circle. He looks tired, aged. In his hands, he holds a copy of La Repubblica. The date is visible. Proof of life. But the message is not from him. It is from his captors. They declare Moro a prisoner of the People's Tribunal. They put the state itself on trial. The Italian government, led by Giulio Andreotti, Moro's own colleague, makes a fateful decision. They will not negotiate. The state must be firm. La firmeza. Firmness. No deals with terrorists. It is a position supported by the communists, Moro's intended partners. A wall of solidarity is erected. The logic is cold, hard. Yielding would mean the collapse of democratic authority. But behind that wall, a question begins to whisper, then to scream. What about Aldo Moro? Is he to be sacrificed on the altar of state principle? His family pleads for negotiation. The public is torn. And from his prison, wherever it is, Aldo Moro begins to write. Letters. Dozens of them. To his family, his friends, his political comrades. Desperate, eloquent, terrifying letters. They are pleas for his life, laced with profound political and personal anguish. He feels abandoned. He argues that the state has a duty to save its citizens. He knows the doctrine of firmeza is sealing his fate. The letters are delivered mysteriously, dropped in public places, mailed from distant cities. Each one is a psychological bomb. The Red Brigades are not just holding a man, they are systematically dismantling the myth of state invincibility. And the government, by refusing to bend, seems to be playing into their hands. The nation is gripped by a suspense more profound than any thriller. A man is slowly sinking, and the very institutions he built are watching from ashore, refusing to throw a rope. The world watches, transfixed. In a hidden cell, furnished with a bed, a desk, and a false wardrobe that conceals a people's prison, Aldo Moro waits. His captors debate his fate. The state debates its response. And the clock ticks, louder with each passing day, towards an unthinkable conclusion. The people's prison is a world of sensory deprivation and psychological torment. It is a room, perhaps in an apartment, its windows sealed shut. The air is stale, thick with the smell of cigarette smoke, cheap pasta, and anxiety. The only sounds are the muffled noises of a city continuing its life outside, the occasional scrape of a chair, the low voices of the guards debating ideology. For Aldo Moro, these are the sounds of his fading connection to reality. His cell is a study in eerie domesticity turned sinister. A small bed. A desk where he writes his letters. The fake wardrobe that masks the entrance. A constant reminder that his entire world is a stage set for his captor's theater of revolution. He is allowed to read newspapers, to see how the state is reacting, or not reacting, to his plight. This is a calculated cruelty. They are showing him the solid wall of firmeza, brick by brick. His letters become the central drama of the nation. Written in his precise, scholarly hand, they are cries from the abyss. To his wife, Eleonora, my love, I am in the hands of the Brigate Ross. They treat me well, but my life is in danger. I beg you, do everything to save me. To his political colleagues, the tone shifts to desperation and bitter reproach. You are letting me die, he writes to Benigno Zaccagnini, his party secretary. He argues that the state is more than its laws. It is flesh and blood. He speaks of the humanity that must temper principle. Each letter that surfaces is a seismic event. The government attempts to discredit them, suggesting Moro is writing under duress, that his mind is broken. But the raw, familiar voice in them rings terribly true. The public reads them in newspapers, hears them debated on radio. A profound unease settles over Italy. The official narrative of steadfastness begins to crack under the weight of a simple, human question. How can we abandon him? The Red Brigades, through their communiques, dissect these cracks with surgical precision. They release audio recordings of Moro's interrogations, the trials. His voice, steady but weary, answers their ideological questions. The effect is chilling. The statesman is being reduced to a pawn, his very words weaponized against the state. They understand the media age better than the government itself. They are not just committing a crime, they are producing a spectacle of powerlessness. Behind the scenes, a shadow war rages. The security forces are in disarray, chasing thousands of false leads. The Brigate Ross cell, led by the ruthless Mario Moretti, is a ghost. Tips flood in from a terrified populace. Every strange neighbor, every unusual noise becomes a potential clue. The pressure cooker of Rome simmers with paranoia. And then, there are the whispers. The conspiracy theories that begin as murmurs in smoke-filled Roman cafes and soon swell into a roar of public suspicion. The Red Brigades are too sophisticated, too well-informed. How did they know Moro's route? How did they time the ambush with such split-second precision? The questions point to darker possibilities. Was there a tip-off? A betrayal from within the state itself? The extreme right, the secret services, shadowy Atlantic alliances opposed to the historic compromise, all become phantoms in the growing mystery. Moro himself, in his letters, begins to allude to these shadows. He writes of other forces interested in his death, beyond his captors. He speaks of a monstrous design. Whether these are the insights of a man facing death or the fragmenting of his psyche is impossible to know. But they feed the growing sense that the official story is only the surface of a much deeper, darker sea. The government remains unmoved. Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti, a figure of immense political cunning, embodies the doctrine of firmness. His face, impassive behind thick glasses, becomes a symbol of the state's impenetrable resolve. In a famous parliamentary speech, he declares that the state must not bend. The word must echoes like a death knell. To the Moro family, and to a growing segment of the public, Andreotti and his allies are not saviors of the Republic. They are the high priests of a cold, political sacrifice. 45 days pass. The psychological torture is meticulous, relentless. Moro writes a final, heart-rending letter to his wife. He speaks of his love for her and their children, recalls simple moments of happiness, and says goodbye. He has seen the communiques from the Red Brigades. The verdict of the People's Tribunal is imminent. He knows what it means. On the morning of May 9, 1978, the nation's suspended agony reaches its breaking point. The Red Brigades issue their final communication. They declare the death sentence against Aldo Moro, executed in the name of the revolutionary proletariat. The announcement is met with a numb, nationwide dread. Where is the body? The not knowing is a final torture. Then, a phone call to the Moro family home. A male voice, cold and flat, delivers a short message. You will find Moro in Via Caetani. The line goes dead. Via Caetani is a narrow street in the historic center of Rome, situated symbolically and horrifically, almost exactly halfway between the headquarters of the Christian democracy and the Communist Party. The two pillars of the historic compromise, the alliance Moro died for, flank his final resting place. Police cars converge, sirens slicing the afternoon calm. Officers push back a gathering crowd, their faces pale. There, parked inconspicuously, is a red Renault 4. It is a common car, the color of blood and revolution. The windows are fogged. An officer opens the rear door. The smell hits him first, the cloying, sweet scent of death and disinfectant. Crammed in the back, curled in the fetal position like a discarded puppet, is Aldo Moro. He is dressed in the same suit he wore on the morning of his kidnapping, now wrinkled and stained. His face is waxy, peaceful almost. He has been shot 11 times. The killers have arranged his body with a final, grotesque theatricality, a brutal period at the end of their sentence. The camera flashes illuminate the scene, freezing it in time. The car, the narrow street, the shocked faces. The image will burn itself into the Italian consciousness forever. The state did not yield. And Aldo Moro is dead. The sight of that red Renault in Via Caetani did not bring closure. It unleashed a storm. The immediate silence that fell over Rome was not peace. It was the vacuum before the hurricane. The smell of the car, decay, gasoline, and cheap cleaner seemed to seep into the very stones of the city, a palpable miasma of shame and fury. For the Moro family, the horror was now compounded by a bitter political battle. The state denied Aldo Moro a full public funeral. The government, fearing his grave would become a shrine for dissent or that the ceremony would be attacked, insisted on a small, private service. To Eleonora Moro and her children, this was the final, unforgivable insult. The state that had refused to save her husband was now claiming his body, denying him the dignity of national mourning. He was buried quietly in the Torrita Tiberina cemetery, under a simple stone, away from the public eye. The family's grief was quarantined. But the public needed to grieve and to rage. Masses were held in churches across Italy. The one in Rome's Basilica of St. John Lateran was overflowing, a sea of anguished faces under the cavernous ceiling. The scent of incense and burning wax could not mask the collective sorrow. Outside, students held silent vigils, their candles flickering in the spring dusk, tiny points of light against a vast darkness. The hunt for the killers shifted into a frenzied, all-consuming gear. The police, their reputation in tatters, were under immense pressure to deliver results. The first major breakthrough came from a routine traffic stop, a moment of pure, chaotic chance. In September 1978, police in Milan pulled over a car for a minor violation. Inside were two key Brigate Ross members, including Corrado Alunni, a ruthless operative. A shootout erupted on the sunny street, the crack of pistols sending pedestrians diving for cover. Alunni was captured. Under intense interrogation, he began to talk. His information led to a series of raids, a cascade of arrests. The people's prisons were discovered. They were not dank dungeons, but ordinary apartments in Rome's middle-class neighborhoods. Walking into one, detectives were struck by the surreal normalcy. The furniture, the kitchenette where Moro's guards had cooked meals, the false wall hiding the cell. It was this banality that was most horrifying. Terrorism had lived next door, behind a wall of plasterboard and silence. The trials that followed were a national spectacle, broadcast on television. The defendants, including the coldly intellectual Mario Moretti, were led into cages in the courtroom, a measure meant to contain animals, reinforcing the state's narrative. They showed no remorse. They shouted revolutionary slogans, turning the proceedings into a platform for their ideology. Moretti, in particular, was chillingly articulate, dissecting the state's failures with the calm precision of a lecturer. He claimed Moro had been judged fairly. The nation watched, not for justice, but for understanding. How could this happen? The answers offered were ideological, fanatical, and utterly incomprehensible to most. Yet, with each confession and each captured document, the official story of the kidnapping as a purely Red Brigades operation began to strain. Anomalies piled up. The perfection of the ambush. The seeming ability of the kidnappers to move Moro across Rome despite a massive manhunt. The mysterious phone calls that had misled investigators. Moro's own letters, pleading with his colleagues to investigate other organizations. The conspiracy theories hardened into alternative histories. One persistent thread pointed to the involvement of NATO and American intelligence. The historic compromise, bringing communists into government, was anathema to Washington during the Cold War. Was Moro eliminated to stop it? Another thread wove through Italy's own secret services and shadowy Masonic lodges like the notorious P2, which counted high-ranking military, police, and political figures among its members. Had elements within the state itself allowed, or even facilitated, the kidnapping to destabilize the country and prevent the Communist alliance? The most haunting question of all, why was there no real attempt to save him? The starkest evidence came from General Carlo Alberto Dalla Chiesa, the decorated anti-terrorism chief. He later revealed he had been given a list of possible locations where Moro might be held, intelligence from a secret source. He pleaded for resources to raid them. His requests, he said, were denied or delayed by his superiors. Dalla Chiesa's testimony was a dagger to the heart of the state's claim of having done all it could. He would later be assassinated himself, in 1982, by the mafia, adding another layer of dark legend to his story. The political fallout was immediate and profound. The historic compromise died with Moro. The Communist Party, having stood firm with the government, was tainted by its association with the hard line. They began a long, slow decline from which they would never recover. The Christian democracy remained in power, but its moral authority was hemorrhaging. A deep, Corrosive cynicism seeped into the Italian psyche. The state was not a protector. It was a cold, Byzantine machine, capable of sacrificing its own. The 1980s saw the slow dismantling of the Red Brigades through arrests and informants. But the Moro case never truly closed. Every few years, a new judicial investigation would open, fueled by a repentant terrorist's partial confession or a declassified document. Each one raised more questions than it answered. Then, in the 1990s, a bombshell. A series of supergrats, terrorists who turned state's evidence, made staggering claims. The most notable, Francesco Chico Marancola, stated that the Secret Services had known the location of Moro's first prison shortly after the kidnapping. He claimed they had it under surveillance, listening in, but did not intervene. The goal, according to this narrative, was to let the Brigate Ross expose themselves, to crush them completely, even if it cost Moro his life. Moro was collateral damage in a secret war. A parliamentary commission was established. It delved into the strategy of tension and the possible double games of intelligence agencies. Its final report was a masterpiece of political ambiguity. It acknowledged grave omissions and unexplained failures by the state apparatus. It spoke of other forces potentially interested in Moro's elimination. But it named no ultimate mastermind. It provided no catharsis. The truth, it seemed, was not a single bullet, but a thick, enveloping fog. In a quiet Roman apartment, Eleonora Moro lived out her days until her death in 2010. She never forgave the state. She kept her husband's letters, his blood-stained clothing from the Reno, in a small case. Relics of a crime that was both intimate and national. She became a living reminder of the unanswered questions, a silent reproach to a country that preferred to move on but found it could not. The legacy is a nation still grappling with its own ghost. Via Fani and Via Caetani are not just streets, they are wounds on the city's map. Scholars and journalists continue to sift through the evidence, the thousands of documents, the contradictory testimonies. The debate is no longer just about what happened. It is about what a democracy is willing to do to preserve itself. At what point does firmeza, firmness, become complicity? Was Aldo Moro killed only by the bullets of the Red Brigades? Or was he also a victim of a political calculation so cold, so absolute, that it decided his death was a necessary price for the stability of the state? The case is officially closed. The story is not.